Ooh, ooh, ooh. We're live, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us. This is WeatherBrains episode number 637 for the 2nd of April, 2018. Delighted you're here, and this is the pre-show. It's a marvelous time of the program where we share what? Where we share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, say outrageous things, and deal with technical problems.
No technical problems allowed, James.
Woo! You were loud.
Just my condenser mic.
Please. Let me turn this thing down some here. And I think I'm getting
I'm
feedback.
not going to stick around anyway because I have 2 major homework projects to do for the hotel side. But I'm going to get your guest on here and make sure he's okay. Rick's in charge of him.
All right.
I've got him an email queued up here. Oops.
Keep talking here. Say something.
Hangout link. Bill Murray. Tonight's guest, Brandley Hargrove. I just sent him his Hangout link, so he should be coming on board here any second. So Brian's on TV in the morning?
Yeah, I got to figure out I'm getting extremely loud, and I'm hearing my audio coming from your channel.
Yeah, hold on. Let me put my AirPods in.
Technical issue here. Anyway, this is what we do on the pre-show. We work out technical problems. So let's see why my headphones are so loud.
Is that better, James?
I don't think it's you. I think it's maybe me.
Oh, yeah, I'm on my AirPods now, so it's definitely not my speakers. I hear myself on your channel. That's unusual.
Probably because there's blood coming out of my ears.
What's making blood come out of your ears?
Your audio is so loud, and
I don't know how to turn it down, James. Yeah, I don't think it's me.
Say something now.
Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Is that any better?
That's strange. When somebody else gets on here, I'll see what they sound like. And
here comes Rick Smith.
Speaking of Rick, talk to me. Talk to me. Hey, Rick.
Hello. How's it going?
Good. Now that helps. Now both of you are loud. So
okay.
Let's
so it's not us. It's not you and I.
No. Yeah, that is like really loud.
Maybe it's still turned up from last week from the crazy Folklore Brain show. Remember you had to turn her way up?
Yeah, and I did a show, one of those podcasts. Goodness, I can't think of the name of it.
I've heard of them. We used to do it here, didn't we?
I did a show Thursday night on a show called what is the name of that? Weather Warriors? No, that's not right. Anyway, but they didn't use this platform. They didn't use Hangouts. They used a web-based deal, which was kind of cool. They don't do video, but they had everybody's audio on a different channel, so they could edit the bad audio issues that you get from time to time on here. But I didn't use Hangouts for that, and I never had my earphones this loud. Output device. Let me play something off this soundboard here. Hang on a second. Woo, that's loud. Everything's loud coming back to me. Could you guys hear that music?
I could.
Yep. Sounds kind of loud.
The science is in! Science!
It's loud on this end, too. It's Aubrey.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hi, Rick.
How's it going? Long time no see.
I know, right?
I think I've gotten 20 Facebook friend requests from people at Mississippi State since I
Yep.
got back. So,
I noticed
Very cool.
my Twitter has exploded. Yeah, which is pretty awesome.
yeah, that is cool.
Where's Brantley? I sent him a link about 10 minutes ago.
Oh, that reminds me. I still need to send Bill an email with some of the cool people we met and some show suggestions.
There was a lot of WeatherBrains fans there, especially when they found out Aubrey was there.
Oh, please. They were all clamoring to get around Rick.
No.
He's a really big deal.
The coolest moment was when we were at dinner that first night and we were there like 10 minutes and another guy at the table was like, wait, are you the Aubrey that's on?
He I think I was talking and he was like, he had turned, I think he was facing you, Rick, and all of a sudden his ears perked up and he just turned around and he's like, wait, I know that voice.
Yeah, that was great. A lot of fun.
That was Nick. Yeah.
Yeah, Nick
Hattiesburg.
from Hattiesburg. Yep.
Yeah, what was cool was, at NWA, I had an opportunity to meet a lot of people that, I'd talked to on Twitter and a lot of people that I, knew but didn't personally know. And what was cool about this conference is I really didn't know very many people. So I actually got to meet and follow a lot of newer people that,
Right.
didn't know. So that I thought was really cool.
Yeah, it was really cool. James and Bill both look perplexed. This is
I know Bill's got that look.
No,
I thought Brantley would already be on here.
I had this weird audio problem, and I just fixed it. I disconnected these ear things and plugged them back in, and they worked. But it was like so stinking loud, I couldn't control the volume. It's like blood was coming from my ears. So, but it seems to be fine now. So, I don't know. Okay, so I'm good. It's been a weird day. So Brian worked for me on television at 4, 5, and 6, while I went out and shot a whole bunch of stuff for a special we're doing Friday evening at 6 o'clock. So I was not on television early. I'll be on TV for the late one, and then Brian's got to come in and work the morning shift tomorrow. I think Brian's had 8 days in a row where he's worked. So
Poor guy.
Oh, he loves it.
What's
this is
the
not a good
special
one.
on?
We had an EF5 tornado here that came through the western suburbs of Birmingham, April 8th, 1998. So it's the occasion of the 20th anniversary of that. And 34 people died, and they decided they wanted to do a 30-minute special. And oddly enough, I thought it was a little odd that they're running it in the 6 o'clock news block, the prime news block here Friday evening. So anyway, we shot a bunch of stuff out there for that. Got some gas station pizza. Man, I am pumped. I love gas station pizza.
Hunt Brothers Pizza.
Man, so right across the street from the old Oak Grove High School location, which is now a memorial park for those that died, there's a gas station. And I said, we got to go in here and get some gas station pizza. Man, it was awesome. They were so nice. Took a bunch of pictures, and they gave it to us for free. I felt like horrible. So I said,
I felt like royalty.
I'm going to come back Friday because I'm going to speak out there at a service at the high school Friday, and I'm going to have a big lunch and spend a lot of money on more gas station. So, but they could not have been nicer. We had a great time. Those are some of the nicest people in the world. You know who we're up against tonight? The Final Four. In fact, I got a new TV in here. I got me a big screen TV finally. And I'm watching the thing online. And out of the 64 teams, guess who I picked to win it all?
Villanova.
Michigan.
No, you did not.
I picked Michigan to win it all.
Well, that's awesome, James. I'm gonna pull for Michigan now.
If they pull off the upset, that will be that'll be slightly cool. So there you go.
That is really huge.
And our the way we do a family bracket, everybody in the family, and our youngest son has a bracket with Villanova, and he's still leading the pack. But if Michigan by chance wins,
he'll take it from over. That
take the
32 points.
You got that right.
Having trouble too.
And I don't have, what's odd. I've got such a big monitor. I can actually put dual boxes up there. And I don't have the digital weather channel, but I will assume they're hitting on time at 8:30 Central. So once we get that, we can make it all happen.
About the time you'll cut your fake weather editorial post.
What?
Fake weather news. There's a lot of it out there, James.
Somebody called me a turd today.
A turd for what?
Because of this stuff going around the news media about the company I work for. And
why would that make you a turd?
I don't know, but I guess I am. So it is what it is. So, but see, I'm the guy that gets all this. I'm used to it. Like we say, I have no feelings left to hurt. So there we go.
Did you see Fischel on Marshall's show?
No. I'm always in church on Sunday morning. I can't.
I DVR it, but I don't know if he was this week or a couple of weeks ago. I'm not sure when he was on, but it was new on my DVR, and he was good. But he said, that if 100 people were sampled and 99 said he was wonderful, one person said he was terrible, he would take that one to heart. So. That's the hard part of being
it's a balancing act. You have to look at both. You can get so down on yourself where you have no confidence and no self-esteem, and you can't perform. And on the other hand, if you read some of the nice ones, you think you're something special and you're better than you really are. And it works both ways. You have to have a balancing act. So I have a folder, called hate mail, and for the ones that sign it, I'll stick it in there. And I keep the nice ones in another folder. And so if I ever need to look at it, if I get too much one side or the other, I'll go look at it. But you need to stay level and balanced. And, we're not as bad as we think we are. We're not as good as we think we are. We're just somewhere in the middle. So there.
Well, I successfully see Brantley on there. So I'm going to get ready to bow out, James, if we can hear him okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, thank goodness. Last week's show was great. I had more local response to last week's show than anyone we've done in a long time. I talk about people that watch it on television, but they were all griping about the audio.
Yeah.
It
was pretty bad.
I so much wanted to hear that show, but I couldn't understand a word she was saying half the time. I'm thinking,
that's because she was from Canada.
I had that hard decision to make every week. Am I going to be the bad guy, the mean guy that says, I'm sorry, the audio quality is not good enough, we're going to have to move you to another week?
Yeah, that's your job to be the mean guy.
Do you let it go? And most weeks I let it go, and I know that's not the right thing to do. So for those that were not happy with the audio last week, it is my fault. I will be the sheriff, and I will be sure that the audio is clean. So Brandon, give me a countdown. Talk to me.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You guys hearing me okay?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Oh, it sounds
Beautiful.
So good.
Sounds like it's testing out.
Good.
Really good. So that's awesome. And welcome to our television viewers watching on local television here. We're glad you're here. It's Monday night, 30 minutes after the hour. You know what this is. It's time for WeatherBrains. We were preempted 2 weeks ago due to weather, but we are back on our regular schedule here. So I think the gang's all here, and let's get this thing started.
Yeah, I'm going to sign off, James. Y'all have a great show. Brantley, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Bill.
Rick, thank you for getting Brantley and making this show happen.
Oh, glad to do it.
I'm going to do financials. Y'all have fun.
Wow.
See you, Bill. That sounds. I'd rather stick needles in my eyes. Here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is WeatherBrains episode number 637. This is the weekly show that's all about weather. This is for April 2nd, 2018. In my world, something weird always tends to happen in the weather world the first week in April. Just like clockwork. Either a blizzard, a flood, a tornado outbreak, severe thunderstorm situation, a cold, anomalous cold, something weird happens. And you look back historically, and so many things have happened during this first week of April. And we are going to have some active storms here tomorrow night, but I don't think it will be hopefully that big of a deal. So maybe we'll escape this year. But I'm thinking of the super outbreak of 1974 coming up on the 44th anniversary. That will be tomorrow. We had an EF5 tornado here, April 4th, 1977. Had an EF5 tornado here, April 8th, 1998. I mean, something's always going on this week. And we do have some of our regulars out this week. Kevin sent one of these cryptic notes, Max problems out. Aubrey, do you think that means like the WSI box at his station?
I think he said Max meltdown. Did I read that right?
Yeah, meltdown. Maybe it's
even
So
worse.
he's gone nuclear.
Woo.
Yeah,
no,
so-
I've had that. We've all been there. Aubrey, if you had a good meltdown lately with the equipment, I mean, we've all had this.
Not lately, but yeah, we definitely had one where you get no graphics. Pull up the website.
Yeah. And, back in the old days, we would use DieFax charts. And I'm the only guy old enough to remember DieFax charts. But these really crude black and white images, and we would show those things if the computer melted down. That's back when we had an Apple IIe and a Krememco. It was a different world back then.
Yeah, but when you guys had the whiteboard and stuff that you were writing on, you didn't have to worry about computers back then, right?
I dealt with those things. I wrote. I actually wrote on the board for 1 year with a magic marker. And then for 1 year, I had the magnetic stick-on things. And those were a godsend because I draw like a third grader. I mean, if you look at those maps I draw on television back then, it was just horrible. So when we got the magnetic stickers, that was like awesome. And then the next year, this was 1981, we got that Apple IIe. And with a 5 megabyte hard drive. I thought we would never fill that up in my lifetime. And now most pictures people take, they're 20 megs each. It's like how times have changed. But no, and I probably shouldn't say this, but our system has been pretty stable here of late. So Rick Smith, do you ever have computer problems at the National Weather Service?
Oh, never. Our computers are just as steady, and no, of course we do. We've got multiple computer systems. Our AWIPS computer that we use to put out the products is we had some of the most dreaded words in the Weather Service are that we're going to have a computer upgrade or a system upgrade, which means that you're going to be recovering from that for a while. So we had a big one last week. We're still discovering things that don't work from that. But yeah, I mean, we got a good team of people that keeps them running most of the time. So can't complain too much.
So you're not old enough to remember AFOS, are you?
Oh yeah. When I started
No, you're not.
Yes. At the Weather Service in Memphis, we had the big blue boxes and keep you warm on a midnight shift, the heat from those exhaust fans in the back and the motors whirring. It was like being in a jet or something. But yeah, no, that's how I started out, typing the zone forecast and AFOS and doing warnings. And yeah, we've come a long way.
I thought AFOS was kind of cool. I mean, I would go down to the Weather Service just to sit and watch and those big old blue consoles. I'm thinking, ooh, this is cool. You had the little black and white monitors, and it was awesome. But times have changed. Kim, you've never worked with AFOS. I know you haven't.
I sure have not. No.
Too bad.
So
It's too bad.
And by the way, how are you feeling? How's everything going?
Thanks. This is the weekly check-in. Is Kim alive over here? Yeah, I'm doing a lot better. This past week was even better than the previous week, where I started to feel like a human again. So hopefully that trend will continue. Things are great.
When is your due date exactly?
September 12th.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
almost 9/11.
Oh yeah,
It's
that
a
was our
hurricane.
first thought.
It's going to be the peak of hurricane season.
That's true. That's true.
The hurricane baby.
It's our secondary severe weather season out here. Who knows what could be happening? Yeah, when they told me the date, I just looked at them and said, no, please just don't be 9/11. I mean, we are disaster scientists, but that's a whole different kind. So we'll just have to see. But things are going pretty well so far over on this end, and very glad as always, when I can join you guys, I am so happy to be here.
We are honored you're here. Now, when do you do like a gender reveal, like some moms do, or how are you going to do this?
Oh yeah, so we were kind of boring with it. I think I'd say that my husband and I are both high information users in general. So when we were offered the opportunity to have the gender given to us during our genetics testing, we were just like, yeah, please tell us all of the things that we could possibly know about this child. So we already know. I guess we could do a big gender reveal here, but we've already mentioned it on Facebook. So we are having a little girl.
Wow.
Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And
Yeah.
wow. I can hear the applause coming. We've only raised boys. I know nothing about raising girls.
Oh, really? You only had boys, huh?
We only have boys. It seems a little high maintenance, but
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. When they told me that we were having a girl, I was just like, oh, thank goodness, because for the first one, it'll be, to me, I feel like it'll be a slower entrance into parenthood, and I know that there are plenty of rambunctious girls in the world, and I sure was one of them. But I know that little boys can just take that energy up to like a whole other level. So I'm pretty happy that this is how we're starting out the family, and we'll see what happens in the future. Of course, my husband had a name picked out for a boy. We had a boy's name all picked out, and now we have no idea what to do for the girl. And my husband just wants me to choose something, but I like to think and optimize. So if the audience has any recommendations, especially anything that's weather related, please send them my way. We are accepting contributions.
I hear Aubrey's
Okay.
beautiful.
Aubrey is beautiful. It's a great name.
Find a good
she has a
September 12th
song.
hurricane name.
Right? Oh, that's a good idea. Oh, yeah. Notable September 12th
There you go.
hurricanes. That's a great idea, Rick.
That's awesome. Well, we could talk babies all night long here, but Rick Smith, you better bring in our guest before he totally hangs up on us and runs.
We do not want that at all. Well, people still to this day, 5 years later, still talk about the El Reno tornado from May 31st to 2013. There's a lot of special, in good ways and bad ways, memories associated with that tornado. Of course, it was 2.6 miles wide. Mobile radar measured winds close to 300 miles an hour. Not too far above the ground. We won't discuss that in too much detail more than that. The only good memory I have of it is May 31st was kind of the grand finale and a kind of a 2-week long period of hell for us in the office with severe weather. It just seemed like it would never end. For most people, though, the El Reno tornado is remembered for as being the tornado that took 8 lives. 4 of those were storm chasers. And one in particular, Tim Samaras, is one whose death really affected the weather community. So tonight we have an author who's written a book about Tim Samaras and that May 31st tornado. Brantley Hargrove. Brantley is a journalist. He's written for Wired. He's written for Popular Mechanics, Texas Monthly. He's covered tornadoes in a couple of different ways. He's gotten into storm chasing a little bit. And right now he lives in Dallas. And Brantley, well, thank you so much for coming on WeatherBrains tonight.
Oh, thanks, guys, for having me.
So kind of start off a little bit. Tell us kind of what's your backstory. Where'd you grow up? How'd you get interested in weather?
Well, I grew up in Tornado Alley. I grew up in Central Texas. In fact, as I'm sure you read in the prologue of the book, I stocked shelves in Gerald, Texas, at a little general store in 1996, I believe. So pretty early on, I would say that weather made an impression on me. The year before that, Twister came out, and I think I was 14. So I was probably the prime audience. Action, tornadoes, Van Halen, all that stuff was right up my alley. But next year, Gerald, May 27th, 1997, kind of made it real in a different way. And I think I've been kind of attracted to severe weather ever since. I mean, even with my first job as a newspaper reporter at the Gillette News Record in Gillette, Wyoming. That's probably where I saw my first tornado. I'm not even sure if it was a tornado. I don't know if it was in touch with the ground, but I certainly saw the funnel cloud and went out for many days during subsequent springs after that, trying to see another one.
So were you into storm chasing prior to 2013 at all? Had you done any chasing or?
Yeah, I mean, not apart from that, apart from that funnel cloud I saw in Wyoming, which I kind of went sort of as part of my job. I'd never really been storm chasing before. Not a real honest to God multi-day storm chase.
Okay. So, May 2013 happened. We had all the tornadoes, and of course, we had the May 31st event. And I guess where you got involved in the story was in August of 2013. You wrote a piece for, what was it, the Dallas Observer? Is that right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so, that was a pretty extensive piece. Talk about that a little bit, and how did you come to write that, and what was your involvement in? How did that come to be?
Sure. Well, anybody who's minimally interested in weather, knew what happened on May 31st. I remember, just being glued to Twitter and watching all the chaser videos I could. And then when I heard the reports, a few days later about, the people who'd been lost, I was supremely interested. Who was this person who was trying to get close to the tornado? What was he doing out there? What was he trying to accomplish? I just had a lot of questions. And the more I read about them, the more I wanted more answers. So I persuaded my editor, the Dallas Observer, to send me to Oklahoma and Colorado to report a story that has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with Dallas. And it somehow worked out. And so, yeah, I in some ways I kind of felt like I'd only scratched the surface with that story, but it was a good launching point to digging in deeper.
So you did that in 2013. Now, at some point later on, at what point how did the book come about? I'm always interested in the process of that. And it has to be different. I imagine it has to be different from writing pieces for magazines and shorter publications to writing a book. How did that all happen? How did you get the book deal?
Sure. Well, even as I was reporting on the Dallas Observer piece, I knew that that this was a subject that just touched me in a lot of ways. And I knew that I could probably do something much more involved on it. So, a few months after the piece had published, I'd had an agent for a long time. I was already talking to him, telling him, look, this man's story cries out for a much more detailed account. And my agent agreed with me. So I set to work on a proposal, worked on it, just when I was off of work at night on the weekends. And sort of laying out kind of a basic chapter outline, and then we ended up selling it to Simon & Schuster, and I was eager to get to work, especially because the contract was finalized right around tornado season, and I knew that part of my reporting process was going to be stepping into Tim's shoes and walking a few miles in them. So I was very ready to dig into the story and to experience his world in ways that might inform the book that I wanted to write.
So that process involved not only interviews with people. We talked on the phone and through email several times, and you talked to other coworkers of mine, Mark Austin, Gabe Garfield, and others. And Gabe's a great guy. I know Gabe probably helped a lot with the research in the book. But did you travel around a lot? You said you traveled to Oklahoma after 2013. What was the research process like for the book and the interview process as you put the things together?
Sure. Well, as you can imagine, I made repeated trips to Colorado because that's where Tim lived. That's where his family is. Oklahoma, when I went out chasing with some of Tim's buddies and colleagues, we went to basically every state in Tornado Alley that you can think of. So I was all over the place for this book.
And clearly this is a book about tornadoes. I don't think we've said the name, but the name of the book is The Man Who Caught the Storm, The Life of Legendary Tornado Chaser Tim Samaras. And it's actually going to be released tomorrow. We're recording this Monday, April 2nd. So Tuesday, April 3rd, you'll be able to get the book through your favorite book retailer around the country. And a lot of people have been talking on Twitter and are very interested in reading it. Now, obviously, it's a scientific book. It's a tornado book. It's a book about storm chasing. But it's really a biography of Tim Samaras, right? The book is about Tim, but it's certainly the framework. It has a lot to do with storm chasing.
Yeah, first and foremost, this is a book about a man. I wanted the reader to know as much meteorology as I could give them without boring them, so that they could understand what Tim was trying to accomplish and how significant it was and how important it was. But yeah, no, this is absolutely a book about a man. Myself as a writer trying to figure out how this guy who came out of nowhere with nothing but a high school education, how he ended up being the absolute perfect man for the job that had to be done. I don't think anybody really saw Tim coming. I don't think anybody would have predicted that this instrumentation engineer with a background in explosives would be the guy to get the data that atmospheric scientists have been trying and failing to obtain for decades.
So I think it's really interesting. One of the questions I wanted to ask is what are the most interesting things that you learned about Tim in your research? But you just rattled off 2 or 3 of them that I found were fascinating right there. He's only a high school graduate. He had no college degree, and his interactions with meteorologists and PhDs and conferences and things like that, that's pretty amazing. And then his background in explosives, kind of go into that a little bit more and what you found about that.
Well, Tim always liked to say that, we're on a podcast, but I'm quoting Tim, so I feel like I can say this. He's always liked to say that he blows shit up for a living. And that's incredibly true. I mean, as I detail in the book, one of his first big projects was this thing called minor scale. It was going to be the largest conventional explosive test ever conducted. It was, sort of a way to kind of model a nuclear explosion without the fallout. And so Tim was in charge of this vast array of high-speed cameras. He had to figure out how to get them all to trigger at the exact same moment. There's high-speed film at the time, so you have maybe a few seconds of film before you run out of the entire reel. I mean, they're going that fast. I mean, thousands and thousands of frames per second. He had to learn how to adapt technology to all these different kinds of uses to get data from extremely dangerous places. One of the interesting projects he worked on that I don't actually, it was in the book, but I ended up having to cut it out. He worked on the TWA Flight 800 investigation. His crew built a scale model of the center wing fuel tank of the aircraft, and they essentially what they were trying to determine was, can jet fuel vapor create a powerful enough explosion to essentially unzip the structure of the aircraft. And so they built this center wing fuel tank, filled it with jet fuel vapor, and lit it. Once again, Tim was in charge of a lot of that instrumentation, sort of, documenting millisecond by millisecond how that center wing fuel tank came apart, and how the flame front, the pressure front, moved through the fuel tank chamber by chamber. He had to figure out how to make technology work for him, how to get it to obtain the information he needed to obtain in extremely hostile environments. And as it turned out, a lot of those same instruments work pretty well in a tornado environment.
In other hostile environments in different settings. Now, this is a biography. This is a very personal story about Tim and his life, and going way back into the very early days. To really tell this story, you talked to his family. I mean, you had access to family and friends, and I think that's one of the things that makes the book very interesting for me, is knowing that you're getting this firsthand information as much as possible from people who knew him the best. So talk about that. I mean, what was that like, interacting with the family, meeting the family, and how was it to work with them?
You approach it with as much respect as you can. I was speaking with Kathy maybe a little more than a year after she lost her son and her husband on the same day. It's a very heavy thing. And I don't know what the book would look like without them. It probably wouldn't look like much. So I'm deeply grateful for them. But yeah, I mean, I reached out to Kathy. I sort of met her by happenstance. probably in late April of 2014, I was chasing with Dan Robinson. Think you guys probably are familiar with that name. And as you get, further towards the end of the book, you realize he plays a pretty significant role in what we know about what happened that day. I was chasing with him, and he was going to meet with Kathy. She wanted to meet him for obvious reasons. He sort of, he was the reason we, have at least some idea kind of what happened. And I was happened to be with him, and we had breakfast together. It was the first time I'd ever met her, she was as nice as she could possibly be. And we exchanged information, and it probably wasn't until August of that year that we finally met up and sat down and talked. And that was the first of several interviews. At one point I met with her and Jenny and Amy, Tim's daughters, as well. And I met with, Tim's other son, Matt Winter. I went up to Iowa and chatted with him for a while. So yeah, the Samaras clan, the wider Samaras clan, Iowa, the book and myself owe an unrepayable debt. The only reason I know anything about this man beyond, what was already in the news, kind of the superficial, Discovery Storm Chasers type stuff, was because the family opened up, some of their most closely held truths and memories and shared them with me. So I definitely felt that it was incumbent upon me to, do the best job that I could with this book and honor, their memories and try to build something, write something that was both truthful and, hopefully, I would hope, someday maybe his grandkids, it's something they could read if they want to understand their grandpa or something like that.
Yeah, that's very cool. I think you did a really good job with it, and I appreciate the attention to detail. And something else, and we've been involved in, being interviewed or helping people, writing books and things like that over the years. And one of the, anytime I get the copy of the book or the manuscript or something, I always flip and try to find where we mentioned in it and see, because I'm always interested. Okay, what did I say, or what did they say I said, or people in our office said? And I got to say, you did a lot of research on this. You did a lot of fact checking, and I know we had a couple of rounds of fact checking going back and forth, just checking on numbers and statistics and things like that. And
yeah, you were a great help for the book.
Well, we tried. I mean, we had a lot of people in the office, like I mentioned, Mark Austin, who's now at the Tampa office, and Gabe Garfield were already really close with the Samaras family before this happened, so they were more intimately involved. But you did a lot of groundwork in getting the science right. That had to be very important as well.
Of course it was, and once again, I'm indebted to a lot of people. Gabe Garfield. That guy patiently fielded a lot of questions from me, repeatedly going over some of the same ground. And then he was kind enough to, read the manuscript and make sure that, that it was, accurate, because you have to kind of strike a balance when you're writing a book like this. You want it to be accessible. So that somebody who doesn't have a master's or a PsyD in atmospheric science can actually understand what's going on. But you also, you don't want the people who really know to be like, oh, you really screwed this up. So yeah, I mean, I had a lot of people who were very patient with me, and who helped me understand this stuff, because it's not simple stuff. I found that the learning curve is very steep. For atmospheric science, and like I know just enough to be dangerous. But I had help, and I had a lot of time to just read a ton. Read a ton of books in preparation for this. I read Theodore Fujita's Mystery of Severe Storms. I found that on Google or something like that. Big hardcover tome. Howie Bluestein's Tornado Alley, and then just a ton of scientific newspapers, just kind of trying to understand enough about what Tim and his crew at TwistX were trying to unravel about storms, because I mean that's the only way you can establish just how important this work is, and I mean frankly how interesting it is. I think the public at large, if they understood more about what atmospheric scientists were after, I mean I think they would be incredibly engaged, because the work they do is super interesting, and so I wanted to tease that out and explain it in a way that people like me would understand, because I'm a layman. I'm one of them.
I think everybody on this show, when they heard that next day, the rumors started to float around that who was in this vehicle that had been found there in a rural Canadian county out there on a gravel road.
Yeah.
And we all knew who it was, but do you think, I mean, it seems like Tim's biggest fame really for the more general public came because of the Storm Chasers, the Discovery Channel show. Would you say that was right?
Yeah, I'd say that was sort of where he kind of went a little more mainstream. I mean, I think he was always a pretty well-known face in meteorology and storm chasing circles. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't until he got on Discovery that I think he started getting approached by just people who had no real connection to storm chasing or meteorology started approaching him, asking for autographs. Yeah, that was kind of when he was introduced to the wider world.
Yeah, he was very approachable. I only got to meet him one time. It was out on the side of a highway somewhere out in rural Kansas or northwest Oklahoma on a storm chase many, many years ago. I just remember him being so polite, and I was kind of new to storm chasing. I hadn't done it much, and he clearly knew what he was doing. You could just tell by looking at him, but he took the time to talk to us and explain things to us. I think this was back in the days where it was pretty rare to actually have data in your vehicle, radar data or weather data of any kind. You weren't having to go to a payphone or something. So showing us what that was all about. And he was just a very cool guy. I had a 5-minute interaction with him, but I always remembered that he was very approachable and very, very polite, very courteous, and very willing to share what he knew with complete strangers. So I always admired that about him.
Yeah. Gentleman to the end.
Yeah. And of course the event happened in our area, you
were on duty.
Just west of Oklahoma City. And I was there, and it's also there the next day. And that's, we had some really, it was kind of surreal interactions going on that day. Gabe Garfield was out doing part of the damage survey, and he was out with the team, Tim Marshall and Don Burgess, and I forget, maybe someone else was out there too, looking at the damage. And this was a very hard damage survey because there just wasn't, thank goodness,
not a lot
of damage to look at. Yeah, it was just very rural and damage was sparse, so it took a long time. And I remember texting back and forth with Gabe, and Gabe sent me a picture of a vehicle that they had run across, this white vehicle. And I had just been in contact with somebody at the sheriff's office at that time. And I think these conversations Gabe and I were having via text, looking at the vehicle, I think there was a realization there, even early that afternoon, that the pieces were starting to fall together, that this mysterious white vehicle out here, we might be figuring out what might have happened with that. Of course, it took a while to really get the whole story, and piecing together the story of what happened had to be a process. I know you were involved in that. Gabe did some of that. I think Dan Robinson. Talk a little bit about the process of kind of recreating or reliving those moments preceding the horrible event that happened.
Sure. Well, starting at the, kind of the beginning of their path, that late afternoon, early evening, once again, Gabe Garfield was incredibly helpful. I went out and met him, and we drove their path. That day we took every turn they took. So I mean, as you can imagine, all the while I'm taking note of the landscape, the surroundings. Meanwhile, Gabe is essentially narrating what was happening, where the tornado was, what they were saying to each other, the dialogue in those moments. So yeah, I mean, we took it turn by turn, to the point where they actually end up penetrating, the outer edge and the northern edge of the tornado and enter the debris core. And actually have debris hitting the vehicle. And so, I mean, that was incredibly helpful in kind of, determining the early parts of the of their path that day. Then, as you know, I've sort of switched perspectives. I spoke with Austin Anderson, guy who was on the Weather Channel crew. He was actually driving the SUV that Mike Bettis was in. I spoke with him just about his experiences. Saw their video. They were, I think, being impacted probably right around the time Tim, Carl, and Paul were pulling up to US 81. And the tornado would have been directly to their south. But at that point, I think in excess of 2 miles in width. And then of course at some point, after they cross over and make their way, further along Reuter Road, Carl's camera, hits the limit of its 5 gigabyte storage disk, and from there, Dan Robinson's camera, which I saw his footage as well, and it picks up the the remainder of the story. You see them behind him, and they just sort of fall further and further and further behind until you can see the outer edge of the tornado moving over them. So there was a lot of there were a lot of different mediums to draw from. Another one I relied on pretty heavily was Anton Simon's El Reno tornado environment display, where he took dozens of chaser videos and synchronized them using lightning strikes. I mean, so I had essentially from every conceivable angle, I could see the tornado. I could, a lot of the times there was a chaser somewhere nearby where Tim, Carl, and Paul were, so I could sort of get an idea for what the tornado looked like from their perspective. I spoke with an Oklahoma state trooper who provided me with his dash camera footage. He was not that far from them when they were, after they penetrated the debris core initially, and then they made that quick turn north to get the hell out of there. The state trooper was not too far north of them, facing the tornado. That was right around the time that I've seen that you first see video evidence of the subvortex that would later claim their lives. So it was a matter of taking all this different data and putting it together and trying to, using my imagination essentially, and trying to meld all these different information streams. One of them that was incredibly helpful was also provided by Gabe, was a Google Earth file that had the outline, path width of the El Reno tornado, and also at various points the radar centroids. It just had all this information, and you could go moment by moment, tracking where the tornado was at what time, and I could usually have a pretty close idea of where, just based on the camera footage, where Tim, Carl, and Paul were at those times. So you could sort of always have an idea of where they were in relation to the tornado. And so by the time they disappear from view from Dan Robinson's rear dash camera, we're basically relying on Josh Werman's paper, that he wrote, because he was, obviously he and Howie Bluestein were scanning, at around those times. He was scanning at the time. Howie Bluestein, I believe, was scanning shortly after Tim, Carl, and Paul were killed. And so, their papers give an incredibly detailed account of exactly what the tornado was doing. At the moment, the subvortex ceased being this, sort of concentric, to the center of the tornado type subvortex, and went on this sort of orbital loop around the, the broader tornado periphery. So yeah, it was simply a matter of taking all of this and condensing it down into a story, and just trying to put yourself in the car with those guys and figure out why they made certain decisions, why they may have lost progress. For example, when they initially went south to approach the tornado early in the chase, their plan was to take the next east road. In Oklahoma and in a lot of the plains, you do have these kind of fairly reliable gridded dirt roads. But they didn't realize that east route actually deaded into the El Reno Regional Airport, which actually forced them to go further south, closer to the tornado than they would have preferred. So I had to figure out all these different events, just like that made them lose progress, made them lose time, and ultimately contributed to the outcome.
Now, Brantley, I'm really interested, with all of this archival research that you've done, I'm sure that our audience is familiar, many people in our audience are familiar generally with their mission, the TwistX mission. Could you describe a little bit about what it was that they were out there trying to do, and what was it that they were thinking about that mission going into that day? Did they have any concerns going into the day about how that mission was going to unfold?
Sure. Well, so the TwistX team, their mission, I'd say their mission had two components. One was for Tim to deploy his probes into the core to get direct in situ measurements from the core of the tornado, while Bruce Lee and Kathy Finley, his colleagues, would surround the tornado with mesonets, essentially to examine the environment that is feeding the tornado. What is it eating? Characterizing the rear flank downdraft. And so that was the TwistX mission. But TwistX, once Discovery Channel's Storm Chasers got canceled, TwistX was kind of at loose ends. They didn't have the funding to mount a full field expedition. And so they, after 2011, they were not doing much. They took 2012 off as a team. They weren't operating. And then in 2013, there was some hope that maybe National Geographic would come through with enough funding to field the entire team. That didn't end up happening. So going into El Reno, Tim was, it was very stripped down. It was kind of like the old days, whenever it was just him and like maybe a couple guys holding a camera going out and trying to deploy on tornadoes. And so, yeah, he went in there with a much more stripped down mission, and tornadoes were not his only concern that day either. Probably much more lucrative was the lightning research project he was working on for DARPA. They were funding this just big moonshot effort to understand lightning and all sorts of electromagnetic phenomena, sprites, blue jets, red dwarfs. There are all sorts of crazy names. But he had developed this this truck, this lightning observatory truck. It's called the Liv, and it was outfitted with the Kahuna, which people who know Tim probably familiar with the Kahuna. It was the Kahuna is this 1-ton camera. It was a Cold War relic that had been used to photograph nuclear explosions. As part of Tim's job at ARA, he had retrofitted it to shoot digital, shoot like 1 million frames per second. It was going to reveal things about lightning that physicists probably hadn't even theorized yet. And he also had, phantom cameras mounted to it, which, each of those probably cost about as much as a Bentley. And so he was out there to, really to break new ground in lightning research. And so that was what he was doing in Oklahoma. That day, the day he was in El Reno, that evening he was supposed to be back further north, like somewhere around Woodward, because you can't shoot sprites right up under the storm. You have to be kind of further away. And I think he probably had every intention of chasing the El Reno tornado, maybe deploying on it, certainly getting some good footage for National Geographic because they were the ones paying those bills at least. And then afterwards making it back to Woodward to shoot the lightning. But, it didn't end up working out that way.
Yes, certainly. It's interesting knowing that they had so many different kinds of missions that they were juggling that day. Did in the middle of any of that, I'm curious to know, just having been here in grad school at the time, I chased the day before, and we noticed that storm motions were a little bit odd. Storms occluded southward, and it was sort of a counter to one's intuition sort of situation to chase.
Right.
And I'm curious to know if that's something that any of his colleagues or family had remarked on, if they were thinking about their approach that day in different terms, because it was something that could have also contributed to their reasoning. I know that there were other people who were chasing that day that were struggling with that. The storm motions were very atypical, and that might be something interesting to describe too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the El Reno tornado just did a lot of things that I'm not sure Tim had any experience with. For starters, at points it was going southeast, and then sort of directly east, and then it was rain wrapped to the north. There's this big slug of rain kind of obscuring the tornado to the north for pretty much most of their chase. So they had eyes on it sort of near the beginning, but for much of the chase, they really couldn't see a whole lot. And so, what you have is a tornado that they've had to literally pursue south, which is kind of unusual for them. And then they end up penetrating the debris core, and they're like, oh, well, gosh, we should probably get out of here. Let's go back north, and then we'll keep going east, and we'll get ahead of this thing and deploy, which is always their strategy. Get ahead, maybe try to stay to the north of the thing, get ahead, maybe drop down a little south and deploy if need be, and then get out of the way. And then this storm just did some pretty crazy things. It grew up scale explosively. And then it made a sharp turn to the northeast, then almost due north. And I don't think they were expecting that. I don't think they were expecting, certainly not a 2.6 mile wide tornado, probably not one that was moving at almost highway speeds, and suddenly coming out of the north. Although that is often what tornadoes do. They head north. So it did a lot of things they weren't expecting. They were blind to it. The rain was obscuring a lot of that. If they were relying on, radar, with an update every 5 minutes, there's a lot going on in those 5 minutes, that radar's not going to be too useful for you unless you're Josh Werman and you have real time, scanning, you get a complete scan once every few seconds.
Yeah.
One of the things his colleagues did remark to me, Bruce Lee and Kathy Finley, was Quinter, Kansas. That was 2008. That was, that almost caught Bruce and Kathy. They got blown into the ditch by this really powerful rear flank downdraft, and they had a very hairy few moments. It was this tornado kind of off in the distance, and then suddenly it was like the entire mesocyclone dropped to the ground, and this thing just grew up scale startlingly. And one thing they said to me, which is always kind of stuck with me, was that Quinter reminded them a lot of El Reno, just the explosive upscale growth. This is sort of mezzo on the ground type presentation, and they wondered if Tim had been in their position, if he'd seen that kind of behavior before. They wonder if maybe he might have made some connections or something like that. I don't know if he would have. I mean, if the thing is completely wrapped in rain and you don't know what the hell it's doing, maybe you couldn't put those connections together. But it's something that they certainly remarked on to me. This just extremely explosive upscale growth that catches you by surprise and puts you in a very bad situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I know Rick undoubtedly remembers. I do, the sort of reckoning that everyone in the community had after this event, because while it was this crew that really got the brunt of its effects, there were a lot of people who almost bit it that day, to be very frank.
A lot of close calls.
A lot of close calls. I almost lost a lot of friends and colleagues that day. And, it was very humbling. And I think it's something that we'd all been sort of thinking about in the previous couple of years, especially since cell phone technology had so changed storm chasing and brought so many people into the fold, that you often saw, when we could watch in real time on the spotter network, you could see where people were in relation to various parts of different storms. And we would see people core punching and driving into storms that were rapidly intensifying and made have a great deal of uncertainty associated with that development.
Sure.
And we would always wonder, who is it going to be? When is our lesson going to come? You just sort of feel like this, it wasn't today, but it could be any day that something really terrible happens to somebody. And when we woke up that next morning and found out who it was that it had happened to, I mean, it took our breath away. You don't even if Tim had never seen something quite like that before, he was one of the most experienced chasers in existence. And what that really taught us is, it can happen to the best of us, not just the least of us. It can happen to the best of us, and we really, really need to take that into consideration. Take that as the most pressing warning you can possibly have about how these things can take you by surprise, and nature always has something to throw your way, something new, some curveball, and you have to be very cautious. And I think in the name of scientific inquiry, yes, we do when we chase take some risks, but we have to question in some situations like this one where strange storm motions were going on and chasing was not the norm. These are the kinds of things where all of us, we have to think about, is this a day where those kinds of risks are worth taking? And, the guys, because of what they went through, they have brought that to all of our attention, to really, to the forefront of, I know, my thinking, I'm sure at the forefront of the thinking of others, especially when you have more congested roads too, and other chasers to worry about, as they certainly did that day. So I know, I think Gabe had mentioned to me, and I'm interested to hear if you had heard this anecdote. The gentleman who was right in front of them in the car, had he felt some degree, I mean, there had been times where they were sitting at stop signs waiting for people to go, right? And so there was this question, if they'd only had 5 more seconds, if I hadn't been there, could they have made it? Had you heard any of those stories of guilt? I know Gabe had heard some folks express that sadness, like maybe if I just hadn't been there, they could have gotten away.
I mean, in talking to Dan, who was in the car, probably just a few hundred yards ahead of them when they were killed. I know he certainly, I know he felt a certain amount of survivor's guilt. And he was like, why did I make it out? But I mean, there's no real good answer to that. It's just luck. They were in the exact wrong place in the storm at the wrong time. I mean, I don't even know what the odds are of that they were, there were 2 places where that subvortex made that little apex during its loop, where it was almost stationary and kind of making, sort of a little loop-de-loop there. There was one, on another dirt road, further southwest, and then they just happened to be in that one place where that subvortex was making its, hitting its second apex. And that was a bad place to be because it was stationary. It was sitting right over the top of them and just, absorbed them into its core flow. So it's just, I don't even know what the odds of something like that are, of all the, circumference of that thing, that they happen to be in the exact worst place at the exact worst time. But one thing I did want to try to convey with this book is, in some senses, I don't even know if what Tim did was storm chasing. It was a degrees of magnitude more dangerous than I think what most storm chasers do. I mean, the guys I chase with, Tony Laubach and Ed Grubb and Ben McMillan, we were on Pilger, Nebraska, and we stay behind those tornadoes. And I never felt too alarmed because I always kind of knew they were moving away from me. And Tim had to get in the path. I can't imagine being in the path. That sounds like, I mean, I call it in the book, I call that no man's land. And I don't think that is an exaggeration. It was extraordinarily dangerous, and Tim was really good at it. And had been able to operate in that space better than anybody before or since. But it was fundamentally dangerous. And eventually it did catch up with him. I mean, if there was ever a storm designed to kill storm chasers, this was it. And they were on the wrong storm on the wrong day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sorry, Rick, I know I'm sort of taking this on a thread, but I'm really interested in bridging a little bit of what you were talking about earlier with where they wound up. Could you describe a little bit more about how did Tim make the leap from doing these investigations on explosives to come into the weather community? What brought him into severe weather and storm chasing and trying to deploy on these storms? I see a logical connection in that he put himself in the path of danger, but what brought him to us?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of makes sense in hindsight in a weird way, but mostly it's just kind of serendipity. In 1997, this engineer in Huntsville, Alabama, named Frank Tatum, had designed this tornado detection device called the Snail, which would use geophones, to detect seismic signatures from tornadoes, because he'd heard a lot of reports from that day in Huntsville, and I believe it was 1989, of all these people feeling the ground shaking beneath them as this tornado was heading into town. He had, his idea was, well, what if we sort of arrayed these sensors around as kind of an early warning detection network? But he needed to test them out on a real tornado, and Frank is not a storm chaser and didn't really have any intention of being a storm chaser. So he just kind of was looking up notable storm chasers from around the Midwest, and Tim's was one of those names who came up, and so he called Tim up, and it was like, hey, I needed to deploy this to see if it actually works, and Tim was like, send it on, I'll do it. And Frank also sent it to a number of other chasers. I think it is worth noting that Tim was the only one who got the Snail anywhere near a tornado. He did so, I believe it was kind of near Rome, Kansas. And I think that was sort of an aha moment for him. He had seen Tornado! Exclamation point, that Nova documentary that has Howie and a lot of other guys from the National Severe Storms Laboratory. And I mean, that was as big a inciting factor as The Wizard of Oz was, whenever he was a little kid. He saw these guys chasing with purpose. And he very much wanted to do that. And so I think, working with the Snail was kind of his moment where he's like, this is actually really satisfying and fulfilling, trying to get data. I mean, it was about something other than just pure enjoyment. And I think that appealed to him. And so when he came across a call for proposals in Commerce Business Daily, which is kind of a clearinghouse for government contracts, he saw that that NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, was seeking bids for a tornado probe. And I mean, it's like a bolt from the blue. Of course, this is the project I've been looking for my entire life. And so he was at Applied Research Associates at the time, and got approval to be the lead on this project. And that's how he ended up. They built this probe, and it was inspired. I always thought this was kind of a funny little wrinkle in sort of the lineage of the HITPR probe. It was inspired by a intercontinental ballistic missile launch vehicle that another old timer at ARA had developed, and it never got past the first phase of development. And so Tim, kind of sized it down and adapted it for use in a tornado. Something that could minimize lift and drag, that could shed the wind, that could survive in that place where nothing else ends up surviving. And so he built this thing, and then he went out chasing it took several years. I mean, several years of frustration, of near misses and busts before, the day happened. And, everybody knows anything about tornadoes and severe weather and research knows about Manchester, South Dakota in 2003. So that's how he got there. It's kind of a circuitous, sort of weird route. I don't think anybody would have picked him as the guy to do it, but that's how it happened.
For those who aren't familiar, what was Manchester, South Dakota, the event in 2003? What happened that day?
Well, so he was, he was kind of, he was kind of at the end of his rope by that point. He'd been chasing for a few years, a couple of years with some National Geographic support, and I think he felt a lot of pressure to produce something. He'd had a lot of really close calls, but he hadn't gotten that, that core strike, that really defining measurement. And so he gets on this tornado in Woonsocket, South Dakota, with really high hopes. I mean, it's late June. A high pressure ridge is about to kill all the storms. I mean, this may be it for the year. And so he's chasing this Woonsocket, South Dakota tornado. It's really beautiful. It's violent. I think it was an F3 or an F2. And the thing stays in the fields the whole time. And finally, when it's going to cross a road and then maybe he can deploy there, it starts roping out. And Tim is terribly frustrated. And, this is probably a wrap for the season. Maybe next year he doesn't even get that National Geographic funding, and it's back to the old days where he's just on a shoestring. And then one of his colleagues, draws his attention to this sort of golden glimmer off to the east. The storm, big towering cumulonimbus catching the setting sun, and Tim checks it out on radar. I think it was WeatherTap. And it's this incredibly vigorous tornadic storm structure there. And so, he hauls butt to pick up the rest of his probes and then tears off east to go intercept this thing. And when he finally gets it into view, it's, I think that was the largest, most violent tornado he'd ever personally encountered at that point. And just this massive F4 beast, the kind of thing that every chaser dreams about seeing. So he's approaching this thing from the west, and it's coming up on this highway. I think it's Highway 10, just near Manchester. And it's too close to the road. It's too big. He has a hard time gauging its trajectory. He has to hold up. He can't just jump in there and drop a probe and get run over. And if you get run over by that thing, you are going to die. And so he kind of pauses for a minute, and when he takes a look at some of the roads he has on his DeLorme road map there, realizes he's got a somewhat even grid of roads, and he takes off down those dirt roads. It gets pretty hairy. He has to head north, then take the next east road to try to intercept this thing that's going to the northeast. So he's entering into the race of his life, and he better hurry up. And it ends up working out. And he doesn't have much time to spare when he deploys, but he gets the data.
Wow, that's neat.
Hey, Brantley, this is James. Real quick, tell me how this book has changed you personally. Doing all the research and writing this?
Well, I've certainly never devoted 4 years of my life to a story. So that's certainly changed me as a writer in terms of how I think about stories and what kind of investment of your life you need to make to tell them. And, it kind of made me a storm chaser, I think, too. I mean, I couldn't help it. I went chasing with, some of Tim's buddies and, saw two simultaneously occurring EF4 tornadoes. And after you see that, you're kind of a goner. Even after this book was finished, I went and quote unquote intercepted Hurricane Harvey. Me and another one of Tim's buddies rode out the eye wall as it came ashore in the lee of a Pizza Hut. So yeah, it's definitely changed me in some ways. It's brought some sort of new interests in my life that I would have never imagined. It's prompted me to do some things I could have never imagined that I would do. And you know, in the process, I got to know this incredible guy that I'm really disappointed that I never got to meet in real life. I would have liked to go chasing with him and Ed and Tony. I think that'd have been ton of fun.
And go, Aubrey.
Well, no, it's all right, James. Why don't you finish your question, then I'll go after.
No, you go. I was going to have him wrap up and tell us how to buy this book and when it's going to be released. But you go ahead.
Well, and I'm sorry, Brantley, I kind of missed out. I had a show to do over here, so I was trying to listen in when I could. But can you kind of tell us maybe something that was maybe the most surprising thing to you that you kind of found out during all your research of Tim?
Sure. Well, I think one of the things that was surprising is that he had this other son, Matt Winter, that he didn't discover that he had until the guy was in his late 20s. It was this woman Tim had dated years before he met Kathy, and he was giving a talk Tim was giving a talk at a weather conference, and Matt, somehow not knowing his biological father, was a huge fan of weather and also a huge fan of Tim's. And so his mom brings him to Tim's talk, and you know, I think that may have been sort of a moment of realization for Tim. But I mean, I just thought it was incredible that how, and I think it made Tim and myself wonder: is being a weather junkie a heritable trait? So I think that was probably one of the most interesting things I came across.
Sounds like a movie script almost.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a crazy occurrence.
So when's the release date, and can people pre-order?
The release date is April 3rd, tomorrow. So today's the 2nd. Yeah, so it's coming out tomorrow. And you should be able to get it. I would think pretty much anywhere books are sold. You know, I always say patronize your local bookstore. And or you know, I mean, you can order it on Amazon or Barnes and Nobles or wherever. Yeah.
Will there be an Audible version in the future, or will there be one at the launch?
There's already one. Yeah. So if you would prefer to listen to it, if you want to buy the audiobook on CD or if you want to download it, you can do that. Yeah. There's a very nice. I haven't listened to the whole thing, but I did listen to the prologue narrated by a man named Jacques Roy. He does a very good job. He has a nice voice.
Awesome. Well, again, that's the way I consume books. I have to listen because of my schedule, and I love having a good Audible book, and I will download that sucker tomorrow. Do it. So, Brantley, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
I'm on Twitter. Hit me up. I always respond. My direct messages are open, so always feel free to send me a message.
Okay. Well, Brantley, thanks so much for your time. It was a great discussion tonight. I learned a lot about Tim, and it sounds like you've done your research. And one more quick question. If you could give some advice for authors, you got the science right. You really put your heart and soul in this. What advice would you give authors that want to do stories about science endeavors like this?
Find yourself a guide. Find yourself somebody with the patience to bring you up to speed. I mean, that was, I think, the most key for this book. I mean, I am also willing to wade through a lot of arcana and read a bunch of scientific papers. But man, at the end of the day, having somebody who can demystify some of that stuff for you is essential.
Awesome. Well, again, thanks so much, Brantley, and all of our listeners, and all of us will be listening and reading this week. So thanks for your 4 years of work, and we can't wait to get a hold of it. And thanks for coming on the show this week.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. It was fun.
Okay, thanks a lot. Have a great week.
You guys too.
Thanks, Brantley.
All right. So, Aubrey, while you happen to be here, just maybe, I don't know, but just maybe we might have some email to read this week.
Letters. We get letters. We get stacks and stacks of letters.
All right. And I went through. I hope I'm not missing anyone because I only have a couple. So one from last week, Devin Greeny sent this one in. Loved the Cindy Day piece. I just shared this story with her. Have you heard of this one? When I lived in Austin, Texas, there was a story in South Texas about La Llorona, the crying woman, the spirit of a woman who drowned her children in the river, then herself. She now hangs out at rivers and creeks looking for more children to drown. Some say she has the body of a woman and the head of a donkey. Super creepy story. But that area is also prone to flash flooding that turns creeks into rivers and rivers into death traps in just a few minutes. Can you think of a better way to keep kids away from the river than that spooky story?
All right, I'm creeped out. That's just too creepy.
So thanks, Devin, for sending that one in. Devin's in Memphis. Appreciate that. And then Steve Holmes sent us in a note about the Chuck Doswell show. Chuck Doswell, favorite guest, but of course, Chuck's comment might not resonate too well with some storm enthusiasts. Steve says that he said, where's this part? Hang on. He says, so Doswell had the two groups of storm chasers, but Steve says there's a third spiritual aspect to the storm, almost biblical. So more of a poetic, spiritual part to the storm as far as chasers are concerned. So that was kind of an interesting take by that. So thank you very much. And I think the other ones I have read. So if you have an email, a guest suggestion, a link, what you like about the show, something you'd like to see on the show, go ahead and send us an email at weatherbrains.com. And don't forget to follow us on the Facebook and the Twitter.
Awesome. And we're going to break very quickly for Professor Peters. By the way, Brian worked a shift for me earlier this evening. He's got to come in at like 2 a.m. I'll give him a pass this week. I won't even give the guy a hard time. I don't think he's had a day off in like 7 days. But we do have a WeatherBrains 101 from Professor Peters. We have an astronomy report from Tony Rice. We'll come back with the weather roundup, picks of the week, and more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
WeatherBrains 101 with Professor Peters.
This is the fifth part of a multi-part series on air masses and their classification. In plains and Mexico. The air has low dew points and warm to hot afternoon temperatures, but with mild nighttime temperature. Due to the buoyancy and elevation of continental tropical air across North America, this air will advect into the mid-levels of the atmosphere once it moves out of its source region. This creates a cap of mild, dry air. If this air advects over maritime tropical air in the boundary layer, the severe thunderstorm threat increases significantly. The boundary of continental tropical is most noticeable with the creation of a dry line. A dry line separates maritime tropical air from continental tropical air. Depending on the strength of the dry line, convergence along the dry line, and the dynamics above the dry line, severe thunderstorms can form near a dry line boundary. Just one more episode in this 6-part series when we take a look at Arctic air. If you have a question about the weather, you can drop a note to question@weatherbrains.com.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your Astronomy Outlook.
The U.S. Joint Force Space Component Command confirmed last night that the Chinese space station Tiangong-1 had re-entered Earth's atmosphere over the South Pacific. This occurred at approximately 8:16 Eastern. So, what do we take out of all of this? A lot, actually, if you step back and consider the last couple of days. There's a lot about science communication to learn here, and it's all directly applicable to the weather enterprise. First, a few facts. Stuff like this deorbits all the time. It's not that big of a deal. This has been happening since 1957 when the rocket that lifted Sputnik re-entered, and it will continue to happen. 6 more times this week, in fact. Looking back over the past couple of days, I'm left thinking, statistics must not be a required course in J-School. Re-entry was possible along every point on the Earth between 43 degrees north and south latitude. That covers about 2/3 the Earth's surface. Each one of those points had a staggeringly small chance of even observing the breakup, much less feeling it. Localization of the news is great, but too many stories pinpointed specific points along the globe, including Michigan, Oregon, and Indiana. Now, the shape of the orbit, coupled with the Earth's rotation underneath, did put those areas around 43 degrees and at a slightly higher chance, but it's a still staggeringly small chance. Only about a quarter of the Earth's surface is land, and about 10% of that is populated. None of this is apparent in too many of these headlines, though. These words matter, especially in headlines. Chinese space station could crash into Michigan. Crash is the wrong word here. It conjures an image that is far larger and far more Holden's even possible. It's hard to see these stories as anything but clickbait when the next paragraph acknowledges that most debris burns up in orbit, which is correct. Stop the "is there danger lurking in your kitchen" style headlines. The clicks aren't worth the distrust generated in your audience. You're supposed to be better than that. This is also not the time to get creative. Do you know how large the pieces of debris will be? To have any idea what this might be like, you'd have to have some knowledge of the construction of the station, and the Chinese weren't talking. Props to those that use graphics provided by experts like Aerospace Corporation, though. They told the real story. The examples that I saw were led by, guess what, meteorologists, being the station scientists they are. As for the rest of you, please reach out to the experts. No matter where you are, there's a university with a physics department not too far away. Find a professor, buy them lunch, and listen to them. Put them in your Rolodex for next time. One of the big takeaways, though, should come as no surprise. We're selfish people when it comes to consuming news. The most common question I got was, will it hit my house? This is no different than the questions meteorologists get ahead of severe weather or just winter weather. You get the uncertainty here, but we need to do a better job at communicating it to those that don't. An approach that was pretty effective this past weekend, instead of talking about what might happen, talk about the most likely event, nothing happening. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
When the weather ball is red, warmer weather is ahead. When the weather ball is white, colder weather is in sight. When the weather ball is green, no change in the weather is foreseen. When colors blink by night or day, precipitation's on the way.
This is the weather roundup for April 2nd, 2018. Aubrey, what's happening in Harrisonburg, Virginia this evening?
It was a beautiful, beautiful weekend, but it got chilly today. So we're kind of awaiting the warm front to lift back to the north and put us in that warm sector. And we'll get a little taste of spring before we cool down again. But this cool pattern, gosh, it's going to be so cool. Oh, and we might have snow to watch on Saturday, by the way.
Ooh.
So yeah, there's that. Winter is never ending.
I've actually seen some modeling that shows snow down into the mountains of northeast Georgia this weekend.
I was noticing it in North Carolina. I was kind of in the middle of checking some of the latest, but I'm thinking, depending on the high, it could, keep it just south of us. But I mean, April snow.
It just happens. The winter that won't die. Down here, we'll probably have frost in the deep south Thursday morning. Deep south where we are, with lows in the low to mid 30s. And we might have a nasty squall line, quasi-linear convective system tomorrow night. Those are always fun, these late night squall lines. You never know. And we're kind of getting into the core of our spring season. So let's go to our Oklahoma officials, Rick and Kim. What's happening out there?
Well, this afternoon on my phone, I got one of the most dreaded combinations of weather advisories you can get: a freeze watch and a wind advisory. So, on April 2nd. So, not a fan at all. But we kind of got a roller coaster going on. We're going to be 60 tomorrow, 70 Thursday. Then we have a wintry mix in the forecast for the weekend, and we're back up to 70. Today, we verified the fact that where it's sunny, it does get warmer, because in the panhandle of Oklahoma, it was like 86 degrees, and here it was close to 50. And so, yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's Oklahoma in April. Anything can happen.
That should be the weather 101 for next week.
It should be, yeah. Where it's sunny, it's warmer. Yeah. Breaking news.
Kim, what's the tornado season going to be like? What's the tornado season going to be like out there? All the chasers getting ready to come out there in May. What are they going to get?
Yeah, Kim.
Lord.
Talk slow. I'm taking notes.
Yeah, Kim. Yeah, that would be hilarious. I all I can say is it's just like Rick said for Oklahoma today. Who knows? Highly conditional. So we'll bank on that. We'll bank on that. I'm hopeful, as I've said before, that now that I get to experience homeownership in Oklahoma, this is a new phenomenon for me that changes my perspective dramatically on my excitement for severe weather. I'm just hopeful that we have a nice, calm year for everyone. So I'll go ahead and make that my forecast, even though that is Not guaranteed.
Wild guess.
Wild guess, wild hope.
Yeah. So let's kind of do picks of the week here. Again, we should mention with so many out, I'm having to kind of run the buttons here, and I am the lead story tonight as usual on the late news here. And by the way, I lost a light. I look better in the dark. I'm just going to leave this thing off permanently. You can't see all this glare off my head.
I'm sorry, James. I took it.
There you go. So picks of the week. This is something related to weather, and I came across a very nice, well done piece by Paul Gross in Detroit on history's first tornado forecast, Miller and Fallbush. And a link to that will be up on the website, weatherbrains.com. Kim, do you have a pick for us this week? I have a funny feeling you might.
I do. So I picked a Nat Geo story about Tim and the TwistX team, and it was done in 2013. National Geographic had done a lot of stories about these guys over the years, so they knew them pretty well. And I wanted to share this particular story just because in the moment it was something I think a lot of us used to sort of heal from some of the trauma of what had happened to someone that many knew and many cared about very much. So pulling out a little piece of history from about 5 years ago to share with all of you.
Awesome. And again, these links will come. Aubrey, what you got for us?
Mine is from someone in our front office actually forwarded me a YouTube video. It is a kid weather segment with a meteorologist, and I think it's from the Chicago market, if I'm not mistaken. But this kid was absolutely hilarious. If you need a good laugh and you need to smile, you watch that video. It had me almost in tears.
It's good. I watched it, and it is good. I will be a voucher for you. That was just awesome. All right, Rick Smith, what you got for us this week?
Well, my pick of the week is it's that time of year again, and the Weather Service is doing its Safe Place Selfie campaign again this year. So Wednesday, April 4th, they're urging people to take a selfie in your safe place. It doesn't have to be just a tornado safe place. It could be your earthquake shelter, your flood shelter, your tsunami haven, wherever you're going to be. But take a selfie and tag it Safe Place Selfie, put it on Facebook or Twitter, and kind of just a way to get the word out about being prepared and thinking in advance about where you're going to go to stay safe from whatever bad things happen where you live.
Awesome. Good deal. And again, all these will be on the website, weatherbrains.com. I think my Michigan pick to win it all is going down the tubes here, looking at the national championship game, but that's okay. Hey, WeatherBrains is typically on the air Monday nights at 9:30 Eastern, 8:30 Central. Most people that watch it live gather together on live.bigbrainsmedia.com. If you listen, we love that too, and we love the iTunes comments. And if you want to get in touch with us, the email address for us, it's email@weatherbrains.com. And all of our social media accounts are up on the website as well, weatherbrains.com. So on behalf of the crew, thanks a lot for listening. Have a marvelous week, and God bless. We made it with 10 minutes to spare.
Good job. Good job.
Perfect. Thanks, guys. It was a good show. Have a good week. Bye-bye.